Hello and welcome to this edition of Let's Talk Human Rights, the video and podcast series from Maastricht Centre for Human Rights. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different from the other sessions we've done. Instead of talking to researchers about their research, we're going to be talking about human rights education and the role that moot courts can play in human rights education. Very briefly, moot courts are a simulated court experience where students can plead on behalf of two different sides of a case. We're going to be going into a bit more detail as to what they are and what they are and how they work with our two guests today, Ruben Tans and Doudou Huang. Ruben, would you like to start by introducing yourself?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Sally. So I'm Ruben Tans. I am a PhD researcher at the Faculty of Law, and my research topic is about the integration of refugees, asylum seekers, in the labour market and in education in Belgium and the Netherlands specifically, but also looking at Germany and Sweden. And I'm also involved in a research project on the integration of asylum seekers and refugees, as well as being a part of the editorial team of the Strasbourg Observers, which discusses case law by the European Court on Human Rights.
Awesome. Doudou?
Hi, I'm also a PhD researcher in Maastricht University at Faculty of Law. I majored in the transboundary harm rules, expensive application under the public international law.
Nice. So we're here to talk about moot courts today, particularly the role of moot courts in human rights education. Obviously, I gave a very brief introduction to what they were. Maybe you can tell us in a bit more detail. What is a moot court?
Start?
Yes, of course. So you've said it before. A moot court is a simulation of a case. So it's a made-up court case with fictional characters, fictional states, fictional parties, where students get to work with the case facts, represent the parties of the case. They first write the legal opinion on behalf of both sides of the case, and then after having presented their written pleadings, they go on to practice with the case in oral pleadings before a real court. Well, a real court, of course, mock judges, but still trying to recreate that feeling of being in a real court.
Yeah, being real lawyers and kind of taking on cases like that.
Yes.
And you've both been involved in moot courts yourself, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Doudou?
I used to be in the Jessup Moot Court competition, so it's based on like International Court of Justice. So if it's any relationship with the human rights, we don't do specifically human rights, but like basically we will have one or two pleadings or points concerning human rights every year, like in the story or the case that we are going to look into. And for myself, I've been involved in 2016, 17, the 19th as competitors.
And so you did this when you were a student?
Exactly, in my both bachelor and master's. And then like together with Ruben, we were the national administrator for 2021 to 22's like Dutch national rounds for the Jessup Moot Court.
Yes.
And Ruben, you've also done moot courts as well as a student, right?
Yes, that's true. I participated in the European Human Rights Moot Court competition, which is now called the Helga Pedersen Moot Court competition, when I was a student in 2019. And this moot court really focuses on European human rights. So you get to practice with the European Convention on Human Rights, and really the main focus of each pleading is the human rights violations that may have occurred or may not have occurred, depending on which side you represent.
And what's it like doing this as a student? What was your experience like doing a moot court?
Well, I really enjoyed being a student and joining this moot court, but it's a very demanding experience. You get to work with the case. You really need to make the case your own, invest a lot of time, but in the end, it's totally worth it. You'll get so many benefits, so many skills that you can take.
Exactly.
Yeah. What do you think are the main kind of skills that you get out of moot courts when you're doing them as a student?
Because like in a students you have courses, you like have lecture from the teachers, but you don't really, or you take exams, but you don't really got a lot of opportunities to really work on a case, apply the laws that you studied, and stand in front of the podium and to present something. So like moot court is a really good way to actually apply your knowledge in like law, and then like use it in a way of practical. So it's like a better way of understanding.
Yeah. And so Ruben, you obviously have the understanding of the Jessup International Law Moot Court, because you were one of the national administrators together, but you also did the European, the Helga Peterson Moot Court. What do you think are the main differences between the two, or how do you think they compare?
Well, in terms of organization, I think they compare very well to one another. So they're both structured in the same way. There's both sides of the party that you get to represent. There is the written phase and there's the oral phase where you go and plead your case in front of the judges. But the substance, the topics that are covered are very different. The Jessup Moot Court is focused on international law, public international law, where then human rights play a minor role in some parts of the pleading. But in the Helga Peterson Moot Court, it really focuses on human rights, and a wide variety of human rights can be the focus of the case. So that ranges from right not to be discriminated, or right to equal treatment in law, right to freedom of speech. Lots of different human rights that can play a role there.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because as well, maybe stepping outside my host role very quickly, it's interesting how many different kinds of moot courts there are, right? Because there are obviously lots of different kinds of courts and lots of different legal systems, and then we have a moot court that's based on one system, so the European Court of Human Rights, and then we have one that's based on the International Court of Justice. Yes. I have also been involved in moot courts that are a mixture of kind of a moot court and role play. So there are some moot courts based in international humanitarian law, so the law of war, and those are interesting as well because you have the court side, but also the other roles that legal actors play, like the
clinic, human rights clinic, and
human rights clinic. So these are kind of lots of different ways I think that students can experience what it is like to work in law and to work in human rights law, and to understand how what they're learning applies in real life. Yeah. And what kinds of human rights issues come up? I mean, you mentioned a few there, but maybe you could talk a bit about the pleadings that you did when you were doing the Helga Peterson. Yes,
of course. So to summarize maybe the basic facts of the case, it concerned online harassment, basically. We've got a female professor, I believe it was. She was being harassed by a public radio host online on Facebook, whatever you want to call it.
And these are all fictional.
Fictional, of course. Yeah. So it was the fictional Facebook, and then she complained of being harassed to the police, to the prosecutor, but nobody took her complaints serious. And in the end, nothing really happened with her complaints. And then she complained in the end to the European Court of Human Rights that her right to private life was violated, that there was a violation of her right not to be discriminated against on the basis of gender, but also that her right to fair trial was violated. So there are different rights at stake in a case like this.
Yeah. And so were you pleading on the side of the complainant, so the professor, or on the side of the state?
I was complaining on behalf of the applicant, on behalf of the woman whose rights were violated. Yes.
Did you find that easier?
For me, it was easier. Yeah. I could be more emotional, perhaps, in my pleadings. I believed I could easily believe what I was saying myself. I could follow my own arguments. Whereas if I had to plead on behalf of the state, I perhaps couldn't give everything that I had. Couldn't really, give my heart in it. And now, as being the representative of the applicant, I could do that. Yes.
And did you have to work together with the person that was with someone that was also pleading the opposite side, so the same case but from the state?
Yes, indeed. Yeah. So we're with four students in a team, and usually the way it works is that 2 students represent the state and 2 students represent the applicant, the individual. And then practicing our oral pleadings, we would practice against each other. So they would then, of course, present their arguments, and we would get to see another perspective on the case. Because if you're always looking from the same perspective at the case, you'll get into a tunnel and you don't see the other side or the weaknesses in your arguments. But being able to cooperate with the other side really also helps in building your own arguments and strengthening your arguments.
And do you think that helped you to kind of understand how human rights law works better? Because I think a lot of people, when we talk about human rights and human rights cases, it's often seen only from the applicant side, right? So only from the side of the person that's complaining that there has been a violation. But what I think is really interesting about that moot court is that you split, so you also have to argue from the state side and argue why there hasn't been a violation, and to try and do so in a way that not only fits with human rights law but that also is convincing.
Yes, exactly. The way it really helps us to understand human rights, you really work with the rules that are in place. There are these absolute human rights, but there are also lots of human rights that can be restricted, and then it's usually for the state to argue why this restriction of that human right was allowed in the case.
For democratic purposes,
Yes, exactly. Democratic purposes necessary in a democratic society. There are lots of requirements that must be fulfilled for these restrictions to actually be upheld by the court. But that really helps us to understand human rights.
So with the European, the Helga Pedersen, I'm so used to calling it by the old name, with the Helga Pedersen moot court, obviously there are lots of human rights that come up because it's focused on human rights. But with the Jessup International Law Moot Court competition, there's usually, if not always, a human rights issue there, if not more.
Yep.
What kinds of human rights issues tend to come up?
Okay, I'll probably not focus on one, but let's talk about maybe within the 5 years. So I start from the 2016s, and in that year is the right to a fair trial and the right in prison, and also the right of freedom. And because that's the year concerning terrorism, so you got people that is under arrest, and then like certain kind of rights under ICCPR was infringed. And then in 2007, it's about a transboundary aquifer. So it concerns
what is a transboundary aquifer?
The water under the ground, which flows from one country to another country across the border. So it's when a state is doing something in one country, and it could cause some certain kind of harm to another country, and it could harm the rights, rights of water or rights to a clean environment to the people in the other state. And then in 2018 and 19, I can't remember clearly, but there's something about right to right for indigenous people. So it's about the traditional knowledge, and also because there's yuck, so the kind of animal migration that could cause a certain kind of damage to the right to the indigenous people. And because you also know that in Jessup the case is actually combined with the what is happening in our real life. So we got resembling cases with Snowden, and also with the COVID-19 thing happening these years. So these cases also talking about right to health, and right to freedom of movements, and also right to privacy for peoples. So it's a very interesting thing that we're always very curious about what is going to be there for human rights problem next year and next year, because this is always the hot spot that we're going to talk about and look into. So it's basically different every year, but it's always under the line and happening with the reality.
Yeah, it's super interesting how so many human rights issues come up, right? It's and sometimes it's not even clear that it is a human rights issue until you start digging into it, and until you start realizing, okay, there are human rights being infringed here, and then assessing is this a strong argument to make about human rights, or is it maybe better to make the argument on something else?
Exactly, because joke has been made that they're actually just recruiting free researchers to do this kind of very deep research for the courts, or even for the academic organization, because when people are really involved in this, they really do their research on the thing that is maybe not very clear or very vague at the moment, but we might have some new developments on the academia part.
Yeah, and then I think one thing to be said with moot courts is that for the students, they're not kind of told either with, I mean, it's maybe slightly clearer with ECHR, but with both moot courts, you're just given the situation. You're not told, like, argue about whether or not there's been a violation of this particular rule. You're given certain broad claims, and then you have to narrow down your arguments yourself.
Yes, well, for example, in our case, when we were students and doing the moot court, the Helga Pedersen moot court, we got the case facts, and then at the end of the case facts, it said the applicant submitted a claim on the basis of, I believe it was Article 6, Article 8, and Article 13 and 14 of the European Convention on Human Rights. They just identified the article, but then these articles, Article 6, for example, is on the right to a fair trial. But what is the right to a fair trial? That is a very broad right, and then it is up to us to identify what was the issue, what part of the right to fair trial was at stake, and then to elaborate on that and to come up with the arguments.
Yeah, it's a very kind of it's a big task, I think, that
Yes.
students are asked to do, but obviously very rewarding. And with Jessup in particular, do you also get the impression that because you're applying human rights law in so many different situations, that it really demonstrates for students how variable human rights law can be?
I would say because human rights law, like at present, has a lot of like vague parts itself. So maybe it is a good chance for the students to actually know in their world and in their understanding what is human rights, like understanding the law in a legal way, instead of, people would just like stand out and say like, here's my understanding about human rights. But if you're really involved in a moot court, you will see it from a legal aspect to say that, hey, we have a treaty, we have a convention, we have customary international law. Human rights is not something that you just look in a merely a society way, but also like it could be examined in a legal way that had certain kind of basis and source that you can rely on. So I think that's the part that student would benefit from, from the moot court, not only from the books and the lectures.
So maybe also kind of clearly drawing the line between saying, okay, we have human rights almost as a language, and human rights as a way that we talk about values, and as a way that we talk about what we expect from governments or what we want from governments, and drawing a clear line between that and the actual protections that there are in international law.
Yeah, exactly.
And because you both, as we said, did moot courts as students, did you think that kind of changed your understanding or led you in a particular direction?
Well, for me, it really changed the way that I look at human rights, the way that I look at the European Convention on Human Rights in particular. It has helped me also to develop other skills, to develop legal reasoning, legal argumentation. Although we do that to a certain extent as a student at Maastricht, it's still very different from pleading an actual case and developing your arguments. It's way more detailed, and this is a skill that I think we can all use writing a PhD to develop our own legal arguments.
Did it have any bearing on what you chose to do next?
Yes, to a certain extent it did, because now my topic deals with the integration of refugees, and that has a link with the right not to be discriminated against. So in my PhD, human rights also play a role, and that's been a conscious choice.
Yeah. How about you, Doudou? Did it change how you saw law, or change what you wanted to do? Yes,
actually very it kind of like changed my path, because before the first time I attend my moot court, I kind of decided to major in criminal law part, but after that my whole career was kind of move into the public international law area. And then in 2017 I was firstly involved in transboundary harm issues. And then also in 2019, and even this year, while we were just doing the administrative work, but still everything was related to the topic that I am doing now. So basically lead my way and decide what I'm going to do. So yes, I would say that it just changed or kind of decided my life.
Yeah.
Career, academic career.
Nice. And I also wanted to ask you a bit about the decision or the experience that you had when you were kind of stepped from being involved in the moot court directly as a student or as someone who pleads to your organizational role when you did when you were the national administrators for the Jessup competition. How did you find that kind of stepping into the other role?
Like, interesting because we talked about it like before, because as a student you get involved, you prepare, everything you need to concern is just what I'm going to plead, like if like whether my arguments is good and whether I can convince the judges. But as administrators, you take care of everything in the background. This is also the part that we're curious about while we are students and while we are competitors instead of the officers. And as administrator, you need to take care of the judge recruitment, and you need to organize all of the hotel things, like catering things, like that is going to happen during the thing, and you need to make sure that all the timetables and the schedules are well taken care of. So it's like a really interesting experience, especially when you just experience as a competitor and you moved into another place. You see the whole competition from a different perspective. It's like you got a whole experience for the competition, and I just feel like I completed some missions during the thing. Yes. I'm done.
Indeed.
Was it the same for you as well, Ruben?
Yes, it was. It really showed me the other side of a moot court. As Dodo said, as a student, you just work with the case, but as an administrator, you need to take care of the practical side of things. To organize a moot court is totally different than participating in a moot court. But it was, I think, for both of us a way to show our appreciation to moot courts and to give something back to the society, to the community.
Community.
Yeah,
that's an interesting one, because a lot of people often talk about the kind of moot court community. I mean, Jessup in particular. They talk about the kind of Jessup family of people who've competed or been otherwise involved in Jessup. Is that something that you also see?
Yes, from a smaller perspective, you meet people that would become your teammates. And from my experience, some of them even become a family friend. It's we trust each other, we experience things, whether good or bad. So after the whole period, you feel like you meet someone in your life. And then in a broader sense, talking about the community, I wouldn't call it a community, but we do form our source. You got people that you know of that you can ask for help in your career or in your research, and then you got people who you can talk with.
It sounds like the dreaded word networking.
Yes, exactly. Something like that. So it's it's a good opportunity to meet people, to get into this kind of legal circle that you can have an opportunity to maybe in your future development or just or even just chat when you're boring, that that you have the same experience with. So this is never a bad thing.
And would you hope to be involved again in moot courts?
Well,
I'm nodding, yes.
In what kind of capacity? Because that's what's quite interesting, is that you have the competitors, but then I think after you've competed, often people will come back and coach or come back and be an administrator. Do you see yourself in a particular role?
Well, I think if I had the chance, I would like to be a coach one day.
Too.
Well, administrator, that doesn't happen very often, because then our university would need to win again. So hopefully we'll get the chance of being the administrator again one day. But definitely as a coach, I'd love to do that, to share my experience as a student and help the new students with their mood. That would be amazing.
Me too.
Yeah, also coach.
Yes, because I think coach is something that we haven't, find the treasure. We still need to experience, if we had to. But no, I'm also very interested in maybe, because coaching the students is you're standing out a bit from them, because they are the one who would win the prize, who would prepare, who would cry and laugh, but you're also supporting them. So it's you're involved, but you're not fully involved. You see from a different angle of how they're preparing, then you can give your experience to them. Whether they will adapt them, it's their choice, but still you can provide some supports and take care of them in some way when they're nervous, when they're down, when they're sad, or when they're just like much too happy. Like kids. So I would say that it would definitely be a very good experience.
Yeah, I think from my experience of coaching, it's always really interesting to see the way that students grow and the way that they go from really students to what feels and looks like professionals, right? Like they speak like lawyers, they act like lawyers, they understand the law in that kind of way, and that's really nice to be part of as a coach. Yeah. And so kind of to round this discussion up, what would you say to a student or anyone really who would be interested in taking part in a moot court?
I would say don't hesitate.
Go for it.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah. And if you could say one thing that you in particular got out of your moot court experience, what would it be?
In my case, I think it would be speaking in public.
Yes.
I never thought that I would be someone speaking in front of judges, let alone sit here and talk to you today. But participating in the moot court really changed that and really gave me a better feeling about speaking in public.
And you also won a prize in your moot court, right?
Yes.
for the speaking.
That's the very important thing.
And Dodo?
For me, I kind of feel it sets the basis of my legal research. So it taught me how to research, how to look into a case, how to read the articles, how to find sources. Like, I would say without moot court, I might not be doing a PhD here. I might do lawyer, or I might become like a government officer or something. But doing moot courts give me the sense of interest of doing academia, because it's interesting to just really look into a legal problem and study into it. So I kind of feel like this is the thing that I got.
Yeah. What we do to kind of round things up here is a question I always ask everyone, which is to be as serious or as silly as you would like. If you could add one new human right to human rights law, what would it be? Ruben, I'll start with you.
Okay. Then I'll choose for something that's related to my PhD, and that would be the right to be welcome anywhere in the world. Well, that speaks for itself maybe, but in many parts of the world and even in many European countries, not everyone is welcome. And in my opinion, everyone should be welcome regardless of the color of their skin or regardless of their religion. So the right to be welcome. Yeah.
The right to be welcome. Dodo?
For me, more practical, narrowing down for a PhD career, maybe right to open access to academia works. So it would be like easier for students, or even, researchers and lecturers and everyone that is involved, to find what they need and to really adapt it into the future works.
Yeah, to kind of open up academic publishing, academic thinking to everyone.
Yes.
Yeah. Nice. Well, thank you both very much. If we obviously didn't speak too much about your research today, which is a shame, but if people do want to find out more about you and your research from the small amount that we heard at the beginning, where can they find you?
Well, they can find my email address at the website of Maastricht University. If they want to know more about the research that I'm also involved in, the NIEM research, they can go to the website forintegration.eu, or just look up the website of the Strasbourg Observers, strasbourgobservers.com, to read blogs about case law of the European Court on Human Rights. Okay.
Dodo?
For me, it's also like in the Maastricht webpage, and you can also find my email address there, and I'm certainly reachable.
Okay. Thank you once again, Ruben. Thank you once again, Dodo.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone at home. Thank you for coming. To find out more about members of the Maastricht Centre for Human Rights, their research, and also the other events and things that are going on at the centre, just go to the website for the Maastricht Centre for Human Rights, and stay tuned for the next edition of Let's Talk Human Rights. Thank you.